All right, hello everybody. If you're joining us now, we are getting everything started and getting everything streaming. So we'll give it a couple seconds for people to sign on and log in before we get going too far. But we're glad you're joining us today. Let's see. All right, looks like we're up and running over here. We're up and running over here. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get us started. Hello, everybody. My name is James, and I have the honor of serving on staff at Ransom Life. And for those of you that don't know, Ransom Life is a healing community for sexually exploited youth here in the San Antonio, Texas area. And we have a vision to see every exploited youth redeemed and restored. We offer counseling services and mentoring services for young people that have been caught up in child sex trafficking or at risk of being trafficked. And another big thing that we do at Ransom Life, along with the mentoring and the counseling, is we have a community awareness team. So we have presentations. We're passionate about bringing information and stories out to people in our community, whether it's parents or teenagers or whoever works with teenagers. We want people to get this information so they can learn more about child sex trafficking and what's happening in our community. And today we have, for the month of August, we're talking about pornography and the ties between pornography and child sex trafficking. And if you weren't with us on Friday last week, we did a presentation that talks about that and sheds light on the truth of pornography and child sex trafficking. So if you didn't get a chance, feel free to go back and check that out on Facebook. But today we're going to be focusing on the pornography addiction and the recovery aspect of it. And to do that, we have joining us today the author and podcaster and the president and founder of Be Broken Ministries, Jonathan Daugherty. And he's joining us today. So thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, you bet. I'm glad to be here, James.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and just jump right in. So I'll turn the floor over to you. Could you share with us a little bit about your story and how Be Broken Ministries got started?
Yeah, so it's a rare thing when you find somebody in this type of a ministry dealing with sexual brokenness issues or sexual addiction issues that doesn't have some kind of personal tie to those issues. In other words, it's kind of a rare thing for somebody to just wake up someday and say, "Hey, I want to go launch out a ministry for those who are, sexually broken." It's like usually, well, you've got a personal story there. You're connected to somebody that had a personal story, And in my case, it was my own personal story. I mean, I got introduced to pornography when I was young. I was 12 years old, and it set its hooks pretty deep in me. And then throughout junior high and high school, pornography kind of became my drug. And it was creating a dividedness in my life. So I was learning how to do these pornography things all by myself or secretly. And I think that's the case that that's how we see a lot of people in our ministry get started. Somehow they got introduced to pornography. It's a rare thing that is not introduced to them. In other words, it's a rare thing. I can't think of one guy that I've ever heard personally his story where he said, "Hey, you know what? When I was 8 years old, I got up and said, I want to know what porn is," and went out and looked for it. It's like, no. Somebody else's brokenness got dumped into that young life. Somebody else introduced. Somebody left, porn out somewhere, or a friend somewhere. Nowadays they show them on a phone or something. And then fast forward, get into college, and now it's not just about pornography. I'm actually crossing what we call the flesh barrier. I'm being sexual with other people. I eventually get married because growing up in the church, I grew up in a Christian home, and I grew up with what we might call the purity narrative, which is, hey, you know what? God designed sex for marriage, so everything else is wrong. Don't do anything sexual until you get married, and then everything will be great. And it's kind of a simplistic view of sex and sexuality. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, I got all these sexual problems. I got all this porn problem. I'm doing all these, inappropriate behaviors sexually. So get married and that'll cure everything. Well, marriage doesn't cure those kinds of problems. If anything, it just starts to accentuate and magnify those problems, because now I'm bringing all the selfishness that comes with developing an addiction to pornography and sex into a relationship that is supposed to be about self-giving. And, those things don't mix. It's like oil and water. So eventually, living this double life in my marriage, I was unfaithful, not only through pornography, but also then through affairs, and then even eventually prostitution, things of those nature. And by the summer of 1999, basically I was depressed, suicidal, and everything blew up. And my wife left me. And that was sort of the beginning of my recovery journey 21 years ago this month. And by God's grace, my wife and I, after 9 months of separation, we were actually reconciled to one another. And so we've been married for 24 years. And we've got 3 kids, 2 of them are in college, one's a junior in high school, our youngest. And so God has shown incredible grace and mercy and forgiveness and faithfulness to us. And I would say that the recovery journey was not what I expected it to be. I know we want to talk about like, hey, what does pornography addiction recovery look like? I think sometimes we have this notion of recovery is look at all these behaviors in my addiction that are bad and harmful, and there's tons of consequences with it. Recovery must mean just stop doing those behaviors. And what I hope to share today is that actually to understand what is really needing to be addressed in any kind of recovery from any kind of addiction, but especially when we're talking about sexual addiction, is not merely behavioral. Like there's so much more deeper things that need to be addressed there that have to do with the relational dysfunction that is perpetuated in a person who develops a pornography addiction. And that's really where I want to eventually go today, is helping people understand that pornography or sex addiction is far more about an intimacy disorder or a connection disorder, a relational disorder, than it is about sex. And so I think it's important that when we dive into it, people understand that when you address those things, the behaviors begin to change, and you're not one-dimensional in your recovery understanding, like just stop behavior.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you for sharing that part of your story. We appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and move into the aspect of addiction. I know a lot of men that would say that they view porn, but they could stop viewing porn anytime. They're not addicted to it, but they choose to refer to their porn addiction as a habit. Is there a distinction between habit and addiction? And if so, is there what is the definition of addiction, or what does it look like in this nature?
Yeah. So earlier on in my own recovery, but also even earlier on in our ministry, and I guess I should kind of complete the story there. In 2003, we started Be Broken Ministries, and really it was out of God just calling me into ministry with 3 words. He just said, "Tell your story." And I wrestled with him about that for a while, because I mean, you heard bits and pieces of my story here, and it's awful. Like, it's terrible. I didn't want to share my story, because it was like, God, can I only share the recovery side? Like, can I only share like the reconciliation of a marriage, or the redemption, or the forgiveness? And it was kind of like, well, if you don't understand what came before that, it doesn't really magnify those elements of recovery in the right context. But anyway, we started in 2003, the ministry. And so ever since then, I've been telling my story and trying to help people understand about not only addiction, but recovery. And even more than that, like, what does a wholeness as an image bearer of God look like? Because it goes, again, way beyond just the sexual, just the addiction component. But early on in recovery and ministry, I would have gotten really hung up on trying to give you like the precise point at which there's a distinction between somebody calling this a habit and it being an addiction. I'm way looser on that now. And the reason is because if we're really wanting to help people understand, what does it mean to be whole? Like, what does it mean to really have a sense of peace and well-being as a human being made in the image of God? Then let's not quibble over where your mess is. Like, let's not quibble over what particular label we need to put on your habit or problem, because the reality is even the folks that say, yeah, my porn, it's a habit, I'm not addicted. Well, my follow-up question is always, and how is that benefiting and enhancing your life and relationships with God, with yourself, with others? And of course, anybody that gets honest has to come to a point that says, okay, even this habit is not enhancing my life. It's actually creating division. Even if I see it as not that quote unquote big a deal, there's it's creating wedges in these relationships, because you're having to decide if you're in a dating relationship or if you're married, like, well, am I going to talk to my spouse about this? Or am I going to talk to my boyfriend or girlfriend about that? It's like, there's a lot of decisions that are being made there. And then even the ones that say, you know what, in our relationship, we're open. Well, guess what? An open relationship just means that you don't know how to have a commitment. You know, it's like you don't know how to actually go all in. And that in itself is a relational dysfunction, because to have an intimate relationship, and I'm not talking about sexually intimate, but to have a close relationship with anybody, there's a level of transparency that's needed there in order for trust to be built. And pornography at almost every turn starts to create these little wedges. Because if I'm becoming more enamored with what I'm viewing in porn, what I'm seeking in porn, versus having a real human connection with the person right in front of me, that has now disrupted my relationship with somebody else. So I don't get, to give you a definition though, basically there is a compulsive nature to addiction. It begins to be one of these things where there's a compulsive need to try to either medicate or meet legitimate needs in an illegitimate way. So one thing I always try to let people know is whatever lustful or sinful or addictive behavior that they are ultimately going after, at the base of whatever that is, there's actually a legitimate desire and need. But it's gotten sort of steered off by an illegitimate means to meet that need. So for instance, think about pornography. There's a legitimate desire for sexual intimacy and to be close with another human being. That's God-given. God made us male and female. God made us with sexual desire. So therefore there's a goodness to that. What pornography does is say, pornography says, come over here and meet that need separate from the covenantal bond. That means that I'm going to commit my whole self to another human being and just take the cheap route. So underneath it, there's a legitimate desire, a legitimate need that says, hey, it's good to have sexual desires. It's good to want to be intimate. But porn says, take a shortcut, take the way out. And so that then can create an addictive pattern that says, I have to have this. So sometimes even the people that say it's a habit I could quit anytime I want, the question I ask is, well, when are you going to want to quit porn? Because that's going to be the telling point of whether or not you actually are addicted or not. Because when you see that, when you honestly can say, yeah, this has not been healthy for myself or my relationships, so now you have the want to quit porn, you might realize, oh, it's not that easy to just say, I want to. And that might indicate to you that it's not just a habit, you might be addicted. Because now it's got control of you instead of you thinking you have control of it.
Yeah, that's good. That all makes sense. All right, now that we have the foundation of addiction, let's go talk about the hope aspect of things. So let's say someone is viewing this and they feel like they're ready for recovery. Can you help us understand what recovery looks like in this regard?
Yeah, so again, we want to give people a fuller picture of what recovery looks like than just the behavioral. It doesn't mean that there aren't behavioral changes that need to take place, but we like to think of it in more of a holistic way. In other words, you're comprised, we believe that a person is essentially comprised of three components, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. Now, the emotional and the spiritual are very, very much tied together. In fact, almost always when we are speaking, like in terms of emotional or spiritual, we almost use them synonymously in our ministry. So another way to break it down is, you might even break it down even more simpler than that, which is there's two components to every human being. There's the material and the immaterial. So there's like your body and your physical being, but then there's also a part of us that we're going, hey, you know what? You can't lay it out on a table and dissect it. Like my consciousness can't necessarily be dissected. My mind, my heart, my emotions, my feelings. When we look at it that way and we realize that ultimately any addiction is a relational disorder, especially a porn or sex addiction is a relational disorder, we want to help people think of getting help as a whole person. So we're going to deal with the physical, we're going to deal with the emotional, we're going to deal with the spiritual. A lot of times what most recovery programs do is they get focused on one dimensional, that physical, like the behavior. And they want to just draw a line there and say, listen, as long as you stop the behavior, everything else will be fine. But the problem is, and we learned this actually the hard way early on in our ministry, because I came into it thinking, hey, you just need to stop these negative behaviors, and then all of a sudden you'll kind of become this whole, well-rounded person. But we started helping guys get off of porn. And then we started getting these incredibly angry phone calls from their wives about 6 months later. It's like, what'd you do to my husband? And we're like, what are you talking about? And these women would be saying like, he's a bigger jerk now than he was before. When we go, oh no, what happened? Is he looking at porn? Well, no. Well, is he acting out with prostitutes? No. Is he acting out in any way? No. Oh my goodness, what's wrong? What's happened here? So we were effectively getting guys behaviorally off of porn. But now what you have is you have this stunted, if I can put it this way, child inside this man's body that has never learned to emotionally bond, never learned how to communicate in a relationship, never learned how to be vulnerable and transparent, and all of these things that are part of having a healthy relationship. And we've just taken away his pacifier. We've just taken away his one outlet that sort of created a sense of balance, albeit unhealthy balance. So then a lot of that, if I can put it this way, a lot of that immaturity then surfaced in brand new ways. And so we realized we've got to do a lot of work on the emotional and spiritual side as much as we do on the behavioral side. So I think it's very important for people to realize that. I think it's also important for people to realize recovery, it isn't easy. We are firm believers that the engine for transformation in a person's life out of addiction into recovery is grace, not law, not rules, not like, we're going to make it massive punishment. It's like, no, it's actually grace. The Bible even tells us in Titus 2 that it's the grace of God that trains us to say no to ungodliness and to live righteous and upright lives. So it's not the rules, it's not the law that changes us, it's grace. And unfortunately, what a lot of people have heard when we say that is they think, oh, so there's just kind of this, so you're saying recovery is this passive engagement? Like just somehow magically kind of the grace of God gets, like pixie dust, it's sprayed on me and all of a sudden I get transformed. It's like, no. Recovery is extremely hard, but it's important that we understand that grace doesn't mean that there's no effort. Grace means that you can't do any work that's going to earn God's favor. So we want people to start out on the recovery journey. The day that they contact us, we want to make it very, very clear that your value and your worth as a human being is always at a 10. It can't go any higher and it can't go any lower because there's a perfect love that God has for you that can't change. And that's grace. It's a gift. Like he loves us, not because we deserve it or we've done anything to earn it, but just because he loves us. That's the environment that we want to invite people into so that then they know when we're talking about all the hard work that it's going to take, the boundaries that they're going to have to set, the amends that they're going to need to make with the people that they've hurt, the people that have hurt them. All of that work is not in a way that says, now God has to love me or now, I'm earning favor. It's like, no. You can't make God love you anymore. You can't make him love you any less. And what we've found is over the years, when people are just saturated in that grace environment, they get a proper perspective on what the hard work looks like. And then they start realizing this work is worth it, not because I think I'm gaining favor, but because I'm beginning to experience how God actually designed me to live. I'm meant to live in freedom. I'm meant to live with joy and hope and live in the light, not with any more deception and double life and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's important to remember, grace, as Dallas Willard used to say, grace is not opposed to effort, but it's opposed to earning. So people need to know it's going to be a hard work. And then people need to know that because the ultimate goal that we have here is of a maturity of mind and heart and soul, that we don't ignore behavioral change, but we want that to be an outcome of the deeper change. So in other words, when a guy comes and let's say he's watching 5 hours a day of pornography, okay, well, there are some immediate boundaries that we need to set. But we want him to understand that the context of setting those boundaries is not thinking that by the boundary itself, your heart and your mind and your soul is going to be transformed. It's like, no, we got to, in some ways, we've got to do some triage here that just stops the bleeding. And then, like, as we get into surgery and physical therapy and all that, you recognize that, okay, yeah, the stopping the bleeding in triage didn't actually do all these things that happened in surgery and physical therapy and all that. It just gave me the opportunity to get into surgery and get into physical therapy. And I think we need to sometimes people in recovery stop at just those triage behavioral like boundaries, saying, okay, I'm gonna put a filter on my computer. I'm gonna, put accountability software. And then they think that is actually what changes them and transforms them. It's like, no, that just gives you the opportunity to change. But the behavior modification stuff is not the end game. The end game is we want you to be a whole person who has healthy relationships, that you don't need this other false substitute.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. Yeah. We actually had a interview with Kelly Newcomb from Brave Parenting about a month ago.
Yeah.
And it's all about, the conversation was about helping children with their devices, like phones, tablets, and helping parents learn proper ways to help them from getting in trouble with all of that. And I think typically the thought is that behavior modification, like you're talking about, if we take all the tablets, phones, computers away from the kids, then everything's going to be okay. But like you're saying, there's more to it. There needs to be values that come with it. So she was talking a lot about creating character when she was talking to parents about that. And I think the same goes like what you're saying with the recovery aspect. It's not about just setting the boundaries, but there's more to it.
Yeah, there was, even Jesus told a story one time about how, a man basically cleans his house metaphorically, so to speak. And so there's one demon that leaves because he cleans up. But the problem is he leaves his house empty. And so it's like a while later, that demon comes back with 7 more. And so his later state is worse than the beginning state. And so the idea of just removing something that is negative without replacing it with actual intentional, positive, righteous living just means at some point it's going to get worse later, because you're not actively pursuing, what am I filling my house with? What am I filling my life with? Not just what negative things am I trying to remove? Because what's the old saying, nature abhors a vacuum. Like if you just think I can just remove things from my life that are negative and then just sort of magically I'm going to be transformed. It's like it's a both and. You have to remove the negative while also supplying the positive. And that's where a lot of the work that we do in recovery is about emotional health and relational wellness and these kind of things. So that a lot of the exercises that we're encouraging people to do in recovery, they're all relational. And sometimes we'll have guys sometimes that are like, why are you having me do all this? I'm doing all this talking with these people, or I'm asking these questions, or I'm engaging my wife. And why isn't it just like, stop it? And it's like, well, because the problem that needs to be addressed is not necessarily the behavior. It was what the relational dysfunction or the intimacy disorder underneath that needed to be addressed.
Wow, that's good. All right, well, thank you for breaking all that down for us. I'll go ahead and open up the floor to questions. If you're joining us on Zoom, feel free to send in any questions if you have any. Jonathan would be happy to answer that. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have anything about Ransom Life. If you're joining us on Facebook, I won't be able to see them right away, but you can still send in questions and we can comment later on after the stream. But while people are sending in questions, I have a few questions for you, Jonathan. Well, first of all, I want to learn a little bit more about Be Broken Ministries and what they have to offer. So if somebody they felt addicted to porn, they're looking for this grace-based recovery, what are some things that Be Broken Ministry does?
Yeah, so we help men, women, and families, so men, women, and parents and teenagers and kids to basically move from sexual brokenness to wholeness in Christ. So our ministry is not only about like addiction recovery, but it certainly includes that. And so we have resources for men who are struggling with any kind of sexual brokenness or unwanted sexual behavior. We have resources for women who are struggling in the same kind of ways, any unwanted sexual behaviors, pornography, and anything like that. We also have a really robust wives care ministry. This is a ministry for wives of men who have struggled in some kind of way. And the thing about the wives care ministry is it's for wives regardless of whether or not their husband is seeking help. So we want wives to know out there, listen, even if your husband is continuing to pursue his porn issue or whatever else, you can still get help for yourself in that situation. And then finally, we have resources for parents to be able to really help them understand how to navigate with their children through a sex-saturated culture. We also have some resources. We've been fortunate to partner with a lot of other ministries to even help leaders, church leaders, pastors, ministry leaders, to be able to help them understand God's design for sex and how do you actually communicate that within your church, within your home, and your community. So we've got a lot of resources that are available for just about anybody who's struggling with any kind of sexual brokenness issue.
Awesome. That's good. All right. And I have another question. So we do a lot of work with parents and educating them, and with youth as well. And so on the topic of pornography, what advice would you have to a parent that might have a child viewing pornography? We know that the average age is 11 to 14. That's the first time viewing porn, and some say it's even younger than that, as young as 8 on average. But what advice would you have for parents that need to address that?
Yeah, and what I would say is it's important that you get good resources that are going to help you not just disseminate information to your kids, because that doesn't work. Again, because we think that the fundamental issue is relational, what we want to do is we want to help parents understand how to relate with their children, how to communicate. Because I think sometimes what happens is, and by the way, I think in a lot of families, it's unintentional, but because there's already just naturally in the family dynamic an authority structure from parent to child. And by the way, that's just natural. Like, a parent naturally feels a sense of authority over their children, and children naturally sense of authority by their parents. Is what tends to happen is then communication starts to become one way. And if you think about it, when kids are really little, when they're infants and toddlers and preschoolers and all of that, so much communication is one way. Like, I just need to tell you what to do. Go here, do this, do that. So a lot of it is very mechanical. Sometimes our communication style doesn't morph with their development over time. So when they get into those preteen and adolescent years, we're still used to sort of like just authority, information dissemination, and if I can put it this way, sort of controlling language. I don't mean that in a negative way, but like, you cannot allow a 2-year-old to just autonomously decide whatever they want to do. It's like, no, they're going to kill themselves, not intentionally, but they will do something that will kill themselves. And so you have to have more of kind of a controlling communication style. What parents need to recognize, though, is that you need to develop with your child as they grow older. And the key thing that we've found, in not only our research, but a lot of the other research that's been done, is one of the key factors that determines the ability that a child is going to have to be able to navigate all of the sex saturation that's in our culture today is really twofold. One is their emotional awareness. In other words, how well do they understand how to identify and communicate what they are feeling, and their relational bondedness to their parents. It's kind of, when I think about what the research is showing in that, it's like, I don't think any of us would say, oh my goodness, I never would have guessed that like relational bondedness with parents would mean better outcomes for children in life. And it's like, well, I think we sort of even anecdotally or experientially would probably guess that. Yeah, you know what, when kids have a better relationship with their parents, meaning there's two-way communication, there's a parent that's willing to listen as much as they're willing to inform, that sense of bondedness, closeness, trust, it's amazing what that does for when they get to more difficult conversations about their bodies and sex and feelings and desires. So emotional awareness and parental connectedness are the two key factors that we see that give an exponentially higher probability of quote unquote success in navigating kind of the porn saturated culture that we live in. We've got some great resources on that. Our director of training wrote a phenomenal book on that called Honest Talk, which is on our website. And then we've got a whole section of our entire website that's dedicated to family. And there's a lot of resources in there, online training courses and things like that.
Awesome. And while we're on that topic, could you talk a little bit about some of the other books that you've written, or the books that have come in from Be Broken Ministries?
Yeah, so specifically, since we were talking about recovery earlier, I've written a book called Grace-Based Recovery. And so it covers kind of the 9 key principles of what does a grace-based approach to recovery look like, and how do you actually implement that into a recovery environment. And so that can be done in either a small group or even one-on-one. We've had a lot of people that have used it kind of almost as like a little a study guide for 2 people that want to be accountability partners and use it that way. So Grace-Based Recovery is one book there. My biography is the book called Secrets. And so it kind of tells my story. And that's a good book for helping men, especially, to be able to just say, hey, you talk about the guys that will say, it's just a habit, right? Sometimes that's a good book to let folks read, to just say, well, let's see what would happen in a real life when something you think is just a habit starts to kind of get out of control. And it's really to help people understand, what does it mean to not live a double life anymore, where you've got part of your life in the dark and part of your life in the light. But what does it look like to actually live your life completely in the light? And we've got all those resources and other books on our webpage at BeBroken.com.
Awesome. All right. On Facebook, I'm going to tag you all, so anyone watching on Facebook can check out your Facebook page and be directed to your website from there. And I'll also send out on Zoom to everyone that was attending today. I'll send out a follow-up email with that information. And lastly, I've been interested in podcasting. I want to hear a little bit about your podcast that you've been doing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've been doing the podcast Pure Sex Radio actually since 2005. So we're actually in our 16th year of doing that program. We've got well over 750 archived broadcasts. So we've been doing that for a long time. We were actually one of the first Christian ministries in this space of ministry with sexual brokenness to begin doing those kinds of podcasts. And really what it is, it's just trying to help people, again, with a lot of these relational dynamics, right? How do you actually mature emotionally? How do you deal with things like pornography and sexual addiction? And we have lots of guests that are on there from all different backgrounds, people that are coming from the LGBTQ community, excuse me, and then folks that are coming from more of like, pastors that have been involved in pornography. We've got women that come on, we've got men, we've got couples. So lots of great stories in there. And we've heard from tons of listeners that just find it an encouragement to kind of keep them pressing into this area of pursuing greater integrity. But that's also can be found on our website, or go directly to puresexradio.com. Or if you've got any podcast catcher, if you just look up Pure Sex Radio or my name, it'll come up.
Awesome. Very good. Well, in closing, I'll say I highly recommend everything that Be Broken Ministries puts out. That's actually how I learned about Jonathan and Be Broken. It was in my recovery journey. I started pornography, I believe I was 13 when I was first introduced to it, and it followed me along even into marriage. And so there's that whole aspect of having those conversations with my wife, and after that it led us to Be Broken Ministries and what they have together. So if you feel like you are struggling with pornography, if you have an addiction, recovery, or whatever the case may be, or if you even have a spouse or know of someone I would highly recommend you go and checking out their website and seeing what resources they have available, and get that journey started sooner than later, because it is important to have these conversations and get working on that recovery. And also, if you have if you need any more information, if you're viewing this on child sex trafficking and what that means, you can check out our ransom life website. And we have a knowledge hub there that has great content and links and resources, facts like that. We even have a Be Broken Ministries on our knowledge hub, I believe, linked to there. So you can find more information there. Or also we have presentations coming up. We actually have one coming up tomorrow on human trafficking and online threats in general. So I recommend, if you haven't viewed that yet, to learn more about that. But if you are joining us, we thank you for listening and sticking in here. This is sometimes an awkward thing to talk about or to listen to, but we know it's very helpful and beneficial. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Jonathan, for your time today. We appreciate you.
You bet. I enjoyed it, James. Thanks.
All right, everybody. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.